Welcome to the first devlog of Hyperwriter. What you can expect in this video is to learn a little bit about what Hyper is, how I built it by myself, and some of the cool technology that is behind it. So basically, what you can expect from these devlogs is basically me talking about my process of trying to build and create and launch an app that'll make me at least $5 a month to cover my DigitalOcean costs. Basically, I don't have a lot of high expectations for this yet. I do hope that it'll eventually grow into a business that I could do something with, but really like the whole point is to just learn to grow and kind of be an entrepreneur to some degree. And also to learn how to build an app entirely by myself. So first off, let me talk about the app. It's kind of a weird app and it's kind of, basically I like to say I made it by accident because I kind of did. Basically, it started out as an asynchronous communication tool, kind of like Twist or Basecamp or other things. And because I just wanted my own, more or less. And then I learned about Obsidian and learned about, Run research and got excited about that. And this part of the tool is kind of that, where it's like these cards that are kind of Twitter-like, and you can connect them together with links, and then they'll backlink properly and stuff. So that was kind of cool. That was fun to build. And then then I decided, well, what's the point of having a Zettelkasten and like a ton of notes essentially if you never actually, sure, I was writing a ton in my Obsidian notebook, but I never published anything because it was hard. And like, yeah, and there was always the dream of like combining all those different pieces of a Zettelkasten of a bunch of Zettelkasten is basically like the system where you connect a bunch of different notes together, and then you can take those individual notes and then turn them into content like blog posts. So I was trying to make that a little easier. Um, but yeah, so I tried to build this section to basically force me to write. So it basically is forcing output. And the way that it does that is by um, every 3 days, it'll ship the top blog post that I have up here to dev.to right now. I'll probably integrate a bunch of other stuff later, potentially. And so this is kind of in the hot seat. I can move these around like that and decide which blog post I wanted to go out next. And um, yeah, so that's basically it. And then, so I've been trying to market this on like Twitter and stuff and trying to get anyone to use it, like anyone. And I got 3 people this week, which I think is a win for me. I think I have 3 people on my mailing list or more. Some of them have not responded to me as I've tried to get them on the platform. A couple have, and the ones that I did get on were actually from other indie hackers who I had tried their product, which they're cool. One of them is Haptic. I'll show you that one real quick. This one's actually a really cool tool that basically allows you to document your journey of building something, kind of like an indie hacker thing. The other one was Threadstart, the guy that made Threadstart. He makes like this basically this like Twitter thread composer. It obviously, both of these apps look like 10 times better designed than mine, but so you should go check them out. But yeah, so basically I talked to the creators of those 2 apps, and then they ended up trying my app. Just, I don't know, probably just because they're nice. And I got some really good feedback about how to make it better. One of the things was, before I had like this crazy 3-pane homepage, I was basically trying to show all the information at once. You could just look at one page and see everything you need to do. It's like kind of like Kanban board style. But as you can imagine, the guy from Haptic, the guy that made Haptic, he said that it was overwhelming to him and that he was very confused and had no idea how to use it. Which the app is kind of confusing still, no matter what. But yeah, like you could definitely see that given how much there's going on this page. So I changed it to have tabs, or these 3 columns that kind of indicate the flow of writing. So you say like, I write down 350 words every day, then I save a bunch of ideas, and then I ship some blog posts, right? That's kind of the idea. So that's that. So the other interesting thing about Hyperwriter for developers, which this is kind of geared towards, is how it was made. Essentially, I have been a full stack developer for a long time. At Podium, wrote a lot of React front end and also Elixir microservices on the back end with GraphQL and Apollo and all the fancy stuff, right? But as I basically realized that all the apps that I've made in the past have basically been um, all the ones that have actually been successful have been server rendered HTML. And I don't mean like server rendered React. I mean server rendered, like the server just responds with HTML when you load up the page. And Phoenix and Rails do this by default. It was the way they were built originally. There was no JavaScript back in the day. That no big JavaScript frameworks. You just kind of modified things with jQuery and stuff. I don't use any jQuery. Well, I guess I use one jQuery library just out of laziness. Uh, but basically, this app doesn't have any React on it. It's basically just server rendered HTML. And you would think that that would really make it slow, but I think it's actually very fast. I do use Turbo, which is a library made by Basecamp that basically hides the page transitions when you click on different things, right? And I think this allows me to build a very rich kind of custom interaction that would be really hard to do in React quickly. So I'm going to talk about this page a little bit and dive into a little bit of the code just so you can kind of see how this works. So first thing I'm going to do is go and delete all these guys. That's just kind of a lazy man modal right there for you. So we're going to delete all these guys. So now we're on this page, and you can see that by default, when you log into Hyperwriter, it kind of is trying to force you into doing this thing, which is basically you write a bunch of blog post titles that kind of get you invested in them, and that way, like, because Hyperwriter automatically posts stuff to, dev.to or like some external blog, it kind of gets you invested because you written down a couple empty blog posts that will be published if you don't do anything. And so if we do this, then you see kind of like the whole page changes, maybe a little jarringly. I can make things line up a little better so that it's not quite as jarring. But basically you can see like now the header changed, this number changed, obviously this showed up, and now this messaging that's in this floating thing also changes, saying now 2 more blog posts. So if I write another one, they'll say, 1 more, so close. And then if I write my final one, then the message goes away and changes and kind of teaches you a little bit about how it works. It tells you that they're going to be auto-published now. Yeah, and then you have this, can't publish unless you give it the API key and stuff. So like normally this would be really hard in React because I'd have to like coordinate all the different elements on the page to gather the proper information, to update this number, to pop open this thing and, render it, and to hide and show the header, right? But that's not the way that this works at all. Because it's just server rendered HTML, when I submit this form, it just reloads the page. And the way the page works, I'm going to try to make this a lot more readable for you guys. So basically, this is the little snippet of the bottom box. So basically, this is just a bunch of HTML, and then it's got this if statement. Essentially, it's a cond block, but basically, it's a bunch of different. You can kind of see them highlighted here. This is the different branches of the messaging. So hello, let's write down some ideas. This is when you have only one blog post there. This is when you have 2, and this is when you have no published ones. So it's kind of like still a beginner message. It's basically that. That's it. And this needs to be populated with some data, right? I got these @ symbols, so I'm injecting some data into that. So let's look at the topic controller, and in here we have this create inline function. And so basically when you submit the form, this is the function that gets called. Basically it grabs the user, it grabs some params, it creates the topic, then it just redirects you back to the index, which is like the list of all the topics. Just basically the page we were just looking at. And then, so that one, if you go to the index, basically all the index page does, apart from, whoops, apart from having an inspect in there that shouldn't be there, is basically it just loads up a bunch of data. So this is just a bunch of data loading. It's doing kind of a bunch of SQL queries. Then it basically just passes that down to the HTML, which gets returned to the user. So basically just returns to the page, you know. And this will just call the code that I was just barely on. So that's it, right? Like I changed all sorts of things in the page. It works the same way as when you render it, as when you load the page, and maybe like there's some fancy animations and stuff I could do, right? Like I could add like some animations to pop in the first one and do fancy stuff or whatever. But I mean, honestly, this isn't that far off from what I probably would have built in React. So I feel pretty happy with it. I know what you're thinking now. You're like, okay, sure, this works for some really simple interactions, but what about more complex ones? And I do sprinkle in some JavaScript here and there. Like for instance, I use sort.js to drag to kind of create this interaction. I actually use CSS to highlight the first item and do all this styling. This is just an after element on the CSS. There's a lot of different kind of like tricks you can do. Like let's do this. Save this guy. Very useless kind of thing. Like I can drag these around and basically I just like observe the DOM and how it changes. And then I just sync that back up to the server. That code was, I don't know, maybe less than 100 lines of code to do that. And I can reuse it across anything that reordered. And there's also a rich text editor in here that I use. I basically just load in a library for that so that if you type stuff, you can do that. So, I mean, it doesn't stop you from doing more. Obviously, I do some like CSS animations here. Like, I don't think it stops you from doing more complex stuff for what it's worth. So last thing, talk quickly about deployment. I use Doku, which basically allowed me to switch quickly from Heroku over to my own container, which allowed me to have my own URL. And yeah, so that's basically it. I'll keep it at that amount for this first thing. It's already kind of long. So enjoy, like, subscribe, comment if you like this and you want more.